All right, so today I want to talk about Mistweaver, both where it stands right now and some of the expectations for like the War Within, the direction that they've been making some changes, what you guys like, what you guys don't like. So let's kick it off. Why don't we introduce ourselves? Hannah, welcome in.
Hello, I'm Hannah. I
What?
played with Method this tier as kind of main Mistweaver. Obviously, this is my second race to World First. I actually played with BDG last year, also playing Mistweaver then, so rank 4th and then rank 3rd. I've been playing Mistweaver since I was originally a Form reroller. I will tell you all
Ah,
that. It is a bit sneaky. It was back in back into poker after Sanctum of Domination. I rerolled from Holy Paladin to Mistweaver. Started off as a Photon reroller, but now I've somehow turned into a one trick. I'm not sure how that happened, but yeah. So I've been playing it for quite a while now. Just sort of stumbling my way around, and somehow ended up in these guilds. But yeah, and I do love Mistweaver. I love kind of melee healers in general. Hence, used to play Holy Paladin. I love ramp healers. Used to play Disc. So
ooh.
kind of a natural progression. Although I do wonder how I went from a 2-trick to a Mistweaver 1-trick. It's an odd journey. But yeah, what about me?
Awesome. And Meg, you not a Fodom reroller, notably.
No, no rerolling here for some reason. I've been playing Monk for a very long time at this point, like mid to end of BFA. I stopped for a little bit and then picked it back up in early Shadowlands, and it's kind of just been Monk pretty consistently from here on out. I raid on it. I do keys mostly, but I do also raid on it. But a lot of Mythic Plus.
Yeah. Okay, so Monk notably has been this spec that has looked so good either in like deep farm content or it's been really good in like PTR and then notably gets like the hammer slammed down onto them. So what has it been like for you, Hannah, this season going into it where yeah, you started becoming more of a Mistweaver specialist, but now it's like the thing everybody wants for raiding?
So for me, it was definitely a bit odd because I remember kind of when I joined BDG, I didn't really have a whole lot of time to gear up a lot of characters. We were talking about like, maybe have a holy paladin or a priest, multiple priests. But there came a point where it was like, I just have to focus on one class and get those mirrors up, and it was Mistweaver. And I remember we were talking a lot about kind of where that would fit into the comp, and I kind of had resigned myself to the 5th healer role, like that it was just going to be I'll be monk if there's a 5th healer needed, but otherwise who knows. But then kind of PTR came out, and we were looking really, really strong. But even then, as you just said, in the back of my head, it was like, well, but we've been really strong before, and we've seen how that's gone. So I kind of was a bit doubtful, even though again we were looking so good. But I was a bit scared. But we ended up being played, and then going into this tier, it was really obvious that Mistweaver was going to be brought, which was odd because we could have been nerfed by a significant amount, and we still would have just unfortunately been better than Windwalker and Brewmaster. That's unfortunately for them,
Yeah.
fortunately for me. So yeah, it was a bit scary because after Vault, back when I kind of played in top 30, we got really, really baited by Mistweaver because it looked so good on PTR. We thought kind of
Mhm.
those old days were behind us, and then they got stealth nerfed really, really significantly, and kind of went into Vault, and it was like, oh my god, and then obviously emergency hotfixes and stuff came in later, but there was still a bit of trepidation. But I'm hoping that maybe finally that curse has been broken, but we'll see.
Right, and Meg, I'm sure you know by now with playing the spec for such a long time that it kind of has felt like okay, it'll be like the 5th healer. It sort of only just brings output, but this raid in particular with all the ad healing and Mistweaver being like the god of single target healing has really been able to like both have the raid fights well suited towards it, and it just cranks HPS.
Every time a situation like that comes up where it's like Sun King Salvation was the first healer fight that
Yeah.
I got to do, and even though I had my monk at that point, I was still playing Holy Priest. So every time a healer fight like that comes up, I'm really worried that it's just going to be like, well, you could play monk, but someone else can do it almost just as well, and you bring Guardian Spirit and all of that. So I'm always scared that there's going to be another spec that's almost as good as Mistweaver as it, but brings more, like Fort and Symbol and Guardian Spirit and stuff. So I've been still waiting for that hammer to come down. Like every set of patch notes, I get nervous. I'm like, oh god, this is it. It's over.
Yep,
Like
same.
like Control F Monk Mistweaver, and I'm just like looking for the death sentence, but hasn't happened yet.
Yeah,
So
and oddly, it has still been an area where Monk feels kind of vulnerable, where they're waiting for the hammer to fall on them. Because even when we got like these Dragonflight talents and everything, Hannah, we've known for years and years about how spec utility, you know, symbol, barrier, all this stuff makes such a difference. And notably, there's just still specs like Monk who are just relying on either having like profiles fit or crazy HPS to make sure that they're brought in high-end rating.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it definitely felt like I remember having this discussion kind of, you know, with Crystal back when he was like the healing was a BDG, and I was trying to. We were talking a lot about kind of the pitfalls of Monk, which I'm sure is something we'll get into later. But you know, again, there is like a lot to consider, and that you know, right now they're just doing so much HPS that you can kind of overlook those pitfalls. You can kind of go, okay, well, yeah, you know, XYZ isn't great, but you know, you're doing such a large amount of output that is kind of forgiven. But that isn't always the case. And again, as you say, I mean, Holy Paladin is arguably probably the worst it's been in a very long time, but they're just still brought. They still bring Devo, they still bring, you know, Autumn even was very, very handy on Farak. They still bring Sack, they still bring Bop. Like, it's just, they have such overloaded kits, you know, in comparison. And this is something, you know, I do hope that the designer will kind of look at. But I also understand that, you know, I guess it's hard to give every class something because then nothing becomes special. But there's some things that I think shouldn't really conform to that, like CR and Bloodlust maybe. But
I was gonna
you know,
say,
you know,
Meg is the queen advocate for
yes,
battle
I was
res
like,
for
oh
Monk.
God. She's heard me say that, and she's already probably got the like 500 essay, you know, typed up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of odd that that's been going around. Now, let's talk about the playstyle for Monk, because it hasn't always been like this ramp-centric healer. Meg, I know from you playing for many, many years, where do you really stand on like cloud focus, where the spec actually ramps, how it bursts healing? What do you think about it?
I personally don't like clouded focus. I know that the tier set that we have right now really feeds into that kind of like degenerate overhealing on one person to cleave onto everyone else and build the tier set and stuff. I don't like that. It feels really bad to have, you know, the goal to overheal one person. I think it kind of just feels terrible to play. Even if the numbers are there, I don't like how it feels. And like right now, there's certain situations where we're not even taking Rising Mist, which is like kind of how I have described Monk. Like Mistweaver is Rising Mist, and it has been for a long time. But now we're taking tier in certain situations, and it's kind of like, you know, if I wanted to play a caster, I would not be playing Monk. So I'm trying to ride out the tier and the clouded focus meta right now, and I'm hoping it'll be over soon. But I definitely prefer the ancient teachings and more the punchy type Monk as opposed to what we have now.
Makes sense. Now, coming from playing Disc as well, though, Hannah, how do you stand on like clouded focus, where Mistweaver stands a ramp profile? Are you happy with it, or you think like a redesign, or going back to punchy would be better?
So I personally had the most fun in when Vault Mistweaver was kind of a thing. When we played Chi-Ji, we had the really, really long kind of, yeah, that was a cool profile, and I definitely appreciate the Yulon build from like a, hey, this makes my class really good in high-end rating, like perspective. However, I'm gonna be honest, and this is probably quite a controversial opinion for me to have, but I would almost like it if they just made us melee disc, because at the moment we're this weird kind of hybrid of like, well, we can hit 10 targets and we're going to do, you know, 2 million HPS on these 10 targets that are completely random from pull to pull and ramp to ramp, you know, and there's no consistency there. And I don't love that compared to Discipline, where you're always going to be having a set amount of players, you know, you're going to do kind of roughly the same HPS every single time. There's a nice level of consistency there. And I don't like how Monk doesn't have that. Now, I think that's probably a challenge for the dev to kind of, you know, if we keep playing into this, you know, how do we make it different from Discipline? How do we, you know, make it, you know, fun for the players still? But, you know, I definitely agree with Meg that like clouded focus to me feels quite degenerate. You know, being incentivized to overheal someone by like a gazillion percent, you know, that doesn't feel good. And then you're punished for target swapping. That feels really, really bad from like my perspective. Because, you know, if someone's dying, I'm gonna have to target swap to them because that's my job, you know, I need to keep people alive. But like being penalized for that, like that doesn't feel good, you know?
God forbid you have to move for a mechanic or
Oh,
die. Give up
do
all your
not.
healing.
I hoarded the spatial paradoxes on Smolderon, and I don't know how Crystal and FTM weren't fuming that I took both. Because, I owned both, and I was like, I literally can't play. You guys don't get it. And meanwhile, they were, having to dodge 1,000 beams, probably going, oh my god.
Okay, so let's talk about Mythic Plus, though, Meg. Are you happy, more satisfied, disappointed with where Monk stands currently?
I'm over the moon, honestly, with how it is in
Okay,
Keys
same.
right now.
I feel like it's the
I-
best of like BFA into like actually having good defenses, actually having good like value in the key and like variety in how you can heal.
Oh yeah. And like I was a really big Way of the Crane fan back in BFA. Like
Yeah.
that was like the thing. That was the best thing ever. And people are like, "Oh, well, don't you want that back now?" I'm like, "No. We have it up permanently with Awakened Phalanx. It doesn't take 25% of our mana. Like we don't get the damage amp there, but our damage is pretty good right now anyway." The funny thing is, and people are going nuts over Mistweaver right now, right? They're like, there's a bunch of rerollers. I know like Ellesmere's playing it in like World First Keys. And it's great, but the thing that kills me is that it isn't that different than it was last season in Keys. The main difference is that we don't fall over dead if a mob looks at us wrong. Like, we are much tankier now, but that's the biggest thing. Like, the throughput has been there. The healing has been there. Rop, Sweep, Para, Revival, like, all of that has been here forever.
Like,
Yeah.
when people tell me, like, oh my god, Shaylin's gift is so broken, I'm like,
Yes!
yeah, it's been broken since season 1. It's
Ugh.
been here this whole time. It didn't just pop out this season. But people are like, oh my god, it's like a lay on
Insane.
hands on the whole group. And I'm like, I know. It's
That's
been
what I'm
amazing.
saying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
you've
the
been
big
doing
thing is just Paladin isn't Paladin in season 2.
right. And Hannah, correct me if I'm wrong, you've been doing like 29s and everything too, right?
Yeah, I was doing some high keys with Now and Jimmy sometimes. That was a couple weeks ago, and like pugging. That was a good 4 weeks ago. I have been on the Christmas break.
Oh,
and,
4 weeks ago you were
yeah,
doing
3
29. Sorry,
Oh,
sorry,
okay,
sorry.
no.
All right, all right.
Actually, no. And I found it really fun because I did play quite a bit in season 1 before I went to BDG because again I felt like Mistweaver was actually pretty good. Yeah, it was a bit comp warping, which is unfortunate, but again it kind of is now in a way anyway. So I didn't love season 2. I don't know how Meg felt about it. I personally didn't really find like I didn't want to play it. I was like, melee is awful. There were certain bosses where I was like, I just want to cry, Whereas now, it just it does feel really satisfying. We feel really powerful, and that's just really good. And I am happy to see so many people playing it. And I remember when Ellesmere first rerolled, and I remember he was DMing both of us like, what is going on? And he was like, do I really need to hit like Zen Pulse? Like, I just don't like it. And I was like, yes, Ellesmere, it's gonna do so much damage, trust me. And he was like, are you sure? But no, like he's been owning on it. Like I tune in and he's just, he was immediately. So it's been really nice to see us finally get like that recognition, and even in raid as well. Seeing so many people play it has been really, really nice.
Yeah, and how many have you been pushing on like other healers as well over the years, Hannah?
I played Holy Paladin. Again, it's always kind of just been like pugging and stuff. Like I never had like a concrete group. But I did play like I did dabble in a bit of Venthyr Paladin. But I was an OG. I was an OG because back then, obviously, I was playing with Anger, so that was like still, shooting for top 20. And obviously I had to play Ashen because that was what was better in raid, and we couldn't swap, right? And I remember, so I would rock in skis, and this was way before like the MDI, so like people had no idea how good Ashen Paladin was, and I would get flamed like super hard. Like people would be sat there going like, what are you doing? You're griefing. And then it was so funny when it was like 3 weeks later or 4 weeks later, loads of people playing Ashen. I was like, yeah, I told you so. Stupid raiders can't play M+, except, guess what? We were ahead of the curve this time. Sometimes we're not, but this time we were. And, I loved Ashen Paladin. But, Ellesmere, again, that was how we actually first started talking, was we were talking about kind of Paladin and Ashen Hallow and stuff. And he was very angry about how much I loved it back then. But so yeah, I've played a bit of Paladin, but always melee healers. So
got it. Okay, and so we have a couple changes coming up for Mistweaver just today with 10.25. What are some of our thoughts of getting Ancient Teachings, giving stamina? What else we have? Some of the, what is this, Tia Plenty? I guess you don't really worry about those things for Expel Harm, right?
I don't know anyone that uses TF Plenty actually.
Yeah.
I think
I was
Any
gonna say.
content.
I think. I
Do
don't know.
they?
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it even in? I think the expel harm changes feel like they're focused for PvP, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Tier plenty. Well, the thing is, tier plenty. I feel like would be more useful if it wasn't gated behind like the worst node, no demand. That kind of like Gusta node that just does nothing for us. But I think it's an interesting talent. It's just positionally not like in the best spot. And the other one as well.
But we do have a massive change coming for the spec. We have Jadefire Stomp, the over the big change to Phaline Stomp. So what do you guys think about this?
It's so ugly. I do not like it at all.
Really? Oh, I think
And-
it's kind of
Oh,
pretty.
God.
I like it. Oh God, am I in the wrong? Here?
Really? You do
Well,
like it?
I think it's
I like
okay. It
the
reminds me of. Go on. Sorry.
I like the concept, but it reminds me too much of like Zandalari trolls. Like if you go into a Taldazar and you look at the floor, that's just everywhere. Like this kind of
That's true.
square, swirly things are everywhere. So I like the color change. I'm not sure, like, is the actual functionality changing? Because I don't know if the size changes. There's some versions of the Jadefire that look huge compared to the old Phaline visual.
I
I
think
don't know.
all of it is supposed to be the same. It just, yeah, it looks very different. And as far as I know, there's not actually any way to have the old Phaline stomp back. There's not like any glyph to go backwards.
I
They
think
said that there
said
will
they'll
be.
adding it.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
they'll
cool.
be adding it back. So that is nice. I mean, to be honest, I'm one of those people who I've wanted like the thematics to be changed for a long time because I'm like, if I'm like on a druid, well, I guess druid is like the worst example, but if I'm like a fire mage, why am I pulsing this blue pretty flower, while I run around? But I think it's pretty though. I like it. I think it's because it reminds me of Alawi from like League of Legends, and I don't know if that's just because that's showing my League addiction. But I kind of like it. I don't know. I get why people wouldn't though. I think it's just like a big snake or something, which isn't very monk,
Yeah.
but
They get like the
Yeah,
big
like-
serpent.
I think they were going for Yulon, but it's a little too like rigid, I think.
Makes sense. All right, so let's set our focus on a little bit of like a wish list going forward. What do you think, just for Dragonflight talents, does Mistweaver want to have revamped? I'm sure, Meg, you're gonna start with like getting rid of Cloud of Focus, right?
Yeah. That would be first to go for me. And then I don't have too many issues with our class tree or our spec tree, but our class tree is kind of rough. It feels kind of bad to have to take some of the things, like why do I have to take Fort Brew and the second Fort Brew to make it a 4-minute to get to Strength of Spirit? Like why is paralysis 2 points? Why do I, if I only want to spend 1 point on para, why do I have to take Disable to get to Fort Brew? Like some of the things don't make any sense at all. And then they add in like these choice nodes, like Dance of Wind or whatever, the choice node with Dampen. Like no one's taking that. Like I don't even know why they bothered putting that in.
I did wonder if that was to do with like, because I think you might be able to cheese some mechanics with like if you have 100% dodge chance and you can taunt off a tank and you dodge it.
That's
Like
true.
that could be cheese, but like that's the only thing when I looked at it, that was the only thing I could think of that they were like trying to introduce with that. But I don't know, it's a bit odd, as you say. Like again, even in high keys, like I feel like that's such a niche thing. But
Yeah.
maybe,
I would worry about like accidentally dodging something before you reach that 100%.
Yeah.
Now
yeah,
you're
that
like,
is the
well,
case. I've just taunted it and I've just been one shot. Oh dear.
Yeah.
This is what like stop you from like getting meleeed early or something if you're just hitting face stomp and just like diving into a pack too quickly or something along those lines. But yeah, the
Yeah.
VRH charge, like Torty said, it should work for that too.
Is that boss hard though? Like I'm more worried about the last boss. in there.
Right, and then you sacrifice a defensive for it, and that would be a lot tougher.
That's the thing. It might not be bad in itself, but the fact that you're giving up Dampen, it's like, I don't know if I'd make that choice.
Makes
Yeah,
sense.
I agree.
We obviously know the statues could use some work, but what else is on the wish list for Dragonflight talent revamps?
Does Brez count?
Breath, what the?
B-Res.
Oh, Breath.
I don't know if it's a
Sorry, I think you
talent.
said breath. My bad. I mean, if you had a talent into battle res, I'm sure everybody would take it in a heartbeat.
I don't know if I have much outside of class tree grievances.
Okay, so let's talk about the War Within then. Since we don't have any monk, I'm pretty sure we don't have any monk hero talents whatsoever right now. but we did get to see some for DK, for Evoker, and for Holy Paladin. Hannah, since you've already played Holy Pally quite a bit in the past, do you think this sort of direction of having like an extra button to like buff allies could be something they would possibly use for Mistweaver, or what are your thoughts on it at the moment?
I'm not sure if they'll go down that route. Maybe. I'm not sure, or maybe the statues could be sources of buffs or something. Like if they were going to go down that kind of line of thinking. I know the Holy Paladin ones. Like when I read them, I personally wasn't floored. Like I was a bit like, okay, this is a bit odd. Because it felt a little bit clunky. Like they were kind of trying to you know, shoehorn these buffs. But again, maybe they'll be fine when they come out on beta, and we'll see how it is then. But I'm not sure if they'll go down like that kind of line of thinking with Monk. I am kind of hoping, to see maybe like really lean into that kind of celestial power, or really lean into like the DPS kind of aspect, fist weaving, things like that. I'm not entirely sure, kind of where they'll take it yet, because I think there's lots of things they could do. One thing I do want though is a mastery revamp going into the War Within. So, whether that's through one of the talent trees or something, I would really like to see that. Because my initial thought was like, we're gonna have Master of Harmony or whatever, and then our current tier set is called like Chi Harmony, and I was like, what if we kind of bring that back in another form, kind of going forward? For example, like that was one of my initial thoughts. And, one of my thoughts has been like, what if that could be like our new master or something? Maybe not quite how it is now, but like, could we see something like that maybe? And because I know mastery obviously has been a very dead weight stat for a really long time, and I'm sure Meg can agree. Like, it feels really bad to get a piece with mastery, and you're like, oh, this is like 12 item levels higher than what I have, or whatever, 14 item levels higher, but it's still a downgrade because it has mastery on it. Like, that's awful. That's awful design.
Meg, do you have any other thoughts on like hero talents? Because reading through what the Holy Paladins were saying, they were really upset about the additional bloat that gets added into the equation. Do you think having more like active abilities is going to be helping or hindering the spec, or do you want it to be all passive? Where do you stand?
I feel like I have a lot of keybinds and I don't have any free spaces because I have, like Iridals and trinkets and then all the monk buttons. And then in peaks, we get people asking like every day, they're like, what do your guys' binds look like? I don't have enough. Like, how do you do this? So I think adding more actives might be an issue, especially when you have things that aren't, like we have a lot of rotational abilities, but we also have things like Expel Harm where it's like 15 seconds. Chi Burst, you don't usually use it, but when you don't use it rotationally, but when you want to use it, you want it like right now for your Phalanx resets. And then you have the issue of like, Tiger Palm, Rising Sun Kick, Blackout Kick, Zen Pulse, Spinning Crane Kick, Renewing Mist, Vivify, Enveloping. Like everything is just a little over the top, I think. And
Yeah.
I don't know how to get away from that. Because other than Chi Burst, I'm like, I don't want to give any of these buttons up. I need these buttons because they do everything for me. They're my cooldowns, they're my normal damage, they're my healing rotation. But what do I drop, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was kind of thinking, especially when I was reading through like the Holy Pally's write-up of like, why aren't the hero talent sort of streamlining your rotation somewhat? Because we have had so many additional like situational buttons that you can hit here and there, like you mentioned with Expel Harm or Chi Burst, where yeah, like a skilled player can make really good use of these things. But then when you're trying to like get new people kind of into the game, and I feel like that's the new expansion area, is like, how do we bring new people into the game? I feel like it's a massive undertaking, and I'm
Oh,
curious what
yeah.
you guys think about this. Of like, how do you get somebody who's like fresh to the game interested in WoW when there is like this barrier of entry of like, here's all the keybinds, here's how you use 30 different buttons.
I don't think that Monk is a good beginner healer, partially because it is really reliant on being in melee, so you have that kind of extra layer of I have to keep everyone alive and myself and be in melee and watch the frontals. So I think there's that level of difficulty. But then you look at something like Holy Priest. I haven't played Holy Priest since season 4 of Shadowlands, so I don't know how much it's changed, but I do remember having like 12 free buttons on Priest as compared to Monk. So I'm like, okay, this is much more accessible. Like this is a lot easier to kind of digest. And I don't keybind traditionally. I use the Orb Weaver gamepad, so even then like my movement abilities, it's moved from what would be what 4 buttons to one joystick. So like I even cheat a little bit with that and I'm still like, where do I put everything? So I think that whether or not something is like an easier healer or a harder healer does have something to do with how many binds they have, but also, when it comes down to actually playing it, how difficult it is. But I do think that just having all those buttons would maybe turn someone off of even trying it in the first place.
Makes sense. And for somebody like you, Hannah, who's gone around through many different healers over the years, do you think that the amount of buttons that a lot of those healers are having with Dragonflight talents, especially kind of bringing back a lot of bloat for certain specs, is something that you want to see going forward? Do you think it's like a big deal, or do you think the revamps have done enough? Or do you think there's some kind of I don't want to say like pruning, because that's like a 4-letter word, but like something to like streamline?
I definitely agree with Meg that I think it's really hard for new players to kind of come in and play certain specs. I mean, look at Disc before the rework. That was I
Yeah.
didn't even want to go to it because I was like, I haven't played this in ages. Last time I'd played it properly in a raiding environment was Sanctum of Domination and stuff. So obviously, it had a few different iterations, whether you're playing Spirit Shell or kind of, the regular evangelism build. But I was when I was looking at it, I was like, God, I didn't really want to play it because I was like, there's so much to remember here with Twilight Equilibrium being so important, and it was a long sequence, right? And even I was kind of put off of it. And I think it's kind of similar where Monk, maybe people can find the baseline, ramp or whatever, okay, but I think there's a lot of nuance to it. I think there's a lot of things you can do, and I think that's what makes it quite hard sometimes for people, or again, or maybe they haven't played these melee kind of ramp healers before, and then they find it quite difficult to kind of execute everything because it's so different. But I would definitely probably an element of kind of debloat, maybe not quite akin to Disc, but we do have a lot. But then the conversation comes up where it's the healing elixir one, if I dare to bring that up in front of it.
Oh, it's fine. They've remedied it.
I was going to say, it was one of those things when I remember that when it first happened, but I completely agreed with Meg at the time, where I was like, well, I don't like this being passive because it was an off the global kind of really, really good heal or whatever, and I felt uncomfortable, but I also understood why people kind of preferred it to be passive as well, because there is so much, as you say, that you can press, you can do, that you feel like you have to have bound for those niche situations. So I also kind of agree with Meg overall with that.
I don't want it to become something like Chiji, where it's an active ability, but you also have 700 different things happening as a passive, because I think that is also really complicated for people trying to pick up the spec. But I could see the hero talents being something kind of like our tier set now, like Chi Harmony, where it is attached to a very basic, it's attached to Renewing Mist and I guess Rapid Diffusion, but it's a very simple spell. You literally just use it, but you can play around it and get a lot of value out of it without it being trying to read a book, getting through a cooldown,
Yes.
or
No,
adding
I agree.
another button. Yeah.
That's the biggest thing that struck me when going through the Holy Pally setup was or I guess it's shared with Prot Pally, right? But it's just this is just a lot of words, a lot of things that some of it is gonna be passive into it, but it's a lot of those extra interactions. And so yeah, I am kind of curious if this might also be a decent area to change up the mastery, because Holy Paladin's rework also did change up their mastery back in 10.1.5. So that was a nice area of okay, it's actually gonna be your beacon and yourself instead of just yourself and having to rely on things like rule of law.
Oh yeah, that was such a good change for them. And I remember reading that and I was quite envious. I was like, God, I hope we get something, because this feels really archaic. It feels very just sort of, we kind of don't need it anymore because we already have this huge single target healing profile that mastery, the mastery isn't really doing a whole lot for us, especially when Essence Font isn't really worth being pressed. I remember obviously back in Shadowlands you still used to Essence Font before you would revival and things like that, because you were gaining enough from it to be worth, whereas now it's I remember people asking me oh, so you don't Essence Font? It's no, there's no point.
Okay, any final wish list ideal things that they could be changing around with Mistweaver for War Within? Any hopes and expectations?
I don't think that it is as important as it was before they kind of made us tankier, but I would like extended melee range, not just for Mistweaver, but I think all melee should just get a couple extra yards. At the very least, a little extra range in my kick, because it feels really bad when you're trying to, kick something and you get storm ringed and you can't reach it and then you die because you got knocked out of range and you're in melee, and what can you do? So that's maybe just trauma from this week, but a little range here and there would be great.
I remember when Storming first came out and you were tweeting about it too. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh
It
yeah.
was like a VOD
When
of
it
like
wouldn't disappear. Oh,
yeah. You were in like Halls of Atonement or something, and it like wouldn't disappear. You're like, what the fuck do I do?
like because I couldn't reach anything, and I'm like,
Yeah.
man, I just have to push Fallen Order and take a nap, I guess. I don't know.
Any wish lists ideas for you, Hannah, for War Within, for Monk?
Well, there's two things, and I saw someone mention this in your chat as one of my co-healers. He went on about the Vivify square root scaling, and this is
Yeah.
kind of more of an issue that I have with Mistweaver overall, and it's just kind of part of it. And that is that I feel like our lack of control over our healing is kind of, again, to use that word, kind of very archaic. It feels very like outdated, like the renewing mist mechanic, the way it spreads, how it's subject to RNG, but then it's kind of controlled by that RNG. Like all of these things feel very odd to me, you know, as again someone who played Paladin and Disc, who had the utmost control pretty much, you know, glimmer targets, atonements, things like that. Kind of playing Mistweaver has felt very jarring. And this is kind of one of those like pitfalls that we were talking about where, you know, we were having to weigh up, you know, how good is Mistweaver really? And this was one of the biggest things about it, is the RNG aspect of it, is, you know, and again, this even happens now with like our, you know, who our chi harmonies decide to go on when we kick or use you know, enveloping
Yeah.
mist and stuff. You know, there's like that element of like, I can't control this, and that's not a good thing from a race to world first perspective. Like that's not good. You know, we want every pull to feel the same. So I don't know how they're going to achieve that, if they even, you know, can or even want to. But that is something that I personally would like to see, is kind of our RNG reined in a little bit, so it isn't so feast or famine. Just because, you know, going from like doing 800k raw HPS back down to like 500k, and you've done nothing different, like that feels really weird. And you know, again, kind of feels very bad when you don't get good RNG. So I would like to see something kind of addressed there, maybe. And you know, yeah, maybe Cloud of Focus to be reworked in some way, or removed entirely. You know, depending on who you ask.
That's right.
You know, I'd be down for a rework. I would be, like I said, I'm here for the melee disc, so maybe my opinion can't be trusted, but that's kind of how I feel about it, at least.
I like that idea personally, because then I could just be playing both and be like, okay, well, I'm gonna go into the alt run, I'll be able to play melee disc, and I'm gonna go into my regular run and play range disc. I'll be chilling.
I did want to ask, do you guys have any opinions? I know that this gets brought up a lot with Clouded Focus. If we were able to move during Soothing Mist, either at full speed or like half speed, like with Manatee when we're channeling that, would that make it better? Would it make it worse? Would it not really change anything because you're still single target healing?
Does Mistweaver need more buffs? I could just see them running around
Yes.
in circles around the Disc Priest and just like laughing their ass off while I'm just standing there for 15 seconds trying to apply all my atonements and set up
Well,
everything.
you guys do penance, so, you know,
I got one
sometimes,
button.
actually.
One
Well,
button
the
and
thing
that's
is,
it.
what's interesting is, as far as I know, actually, the Essence font buffs we received going into this tier were actually the devs' response to kind of how, you know, Mistweavers felt punished for needing to move. We felt like we didn't really have a lot we could do. And it was between either buffing Essence font and, you know, allowing us to move while channeling Soothing Mist, although it would have been at reduced rate, you know, similar to Manatee. And they decided to go with the Essence font change. So I really liked that until they decided to then nerf it enough to the point where now it's again useless. So I'm not really sure what the line of thinking was there. You know, and again, it's like with Manatee, and like I feel like we would have been quite slow because we would have been RP walking around an entire encounter if that had been the case, you know. And you know, I can see why some people would have preferred that. I quite liked the Essence font changes. It felt, you know, it felt really good because it was a 30-second cooldown. You know, it wasn't something we just spam anymore. It was like a mini raid CD or whatever. You know, because and you had to use Focus Thunder with it. So like to me, you know, I guess people looked at the logs and like, oh my god, it's doing so much. But it's like, but we are having to, you know, we're only using this every 30 seconds at most, and we are, you know, using our Focus Thunder with it. So I'm not surprised it's doing that much. It should be doing that much. And upwelling, like we're committing talents to it as well. So it was like, for me, I thought it was okay. Maybe could have used a slight reduction, but overall, I don't think it should have been nerfed as hard as it was. Because then it's like, well, we're back to square one, you know?
Yeah.